Okay, so Netflix's new animated series, Kid Cosmic, is really interesting, isn't it? This is a Netflix original animated show from the mind of Craig McCracken. Yes, the same Craig McCracken that gave us stuff like Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and stuff like that, and worked on a whole heck of a lot of other cartoons from that rough era of television. He's extremely prolific in the animation community, and in fact even did an interview recently that's up on YouTube specifically about the creation of this show that I haven't watched yet, but I'm definitely going to in time for the full season 1 review that I'm definitely going to do. Because this show grabbed my attention immediately just based on its premise. I didn't even need to watch the show first. I wanted to watch the show so I could talk about specifics from the show, but I didn't need to watch the show in order to know I'd be interested in this show. I'm going to include a link to the trailer for the show in the description below. If I forget to do that, let me know, by the way, so I can fix that. Just because I do feel like, surprisingly enough, the trailer does a really good job of selling the premise of the show without giving too much away. Like, it hints that things aren't going to be all fun and games the whole time, that this isn't a power fantasy so much as it is trying to tell a genuine story. I mean, it's a little of both, right? But still, you get my point. And there's obviously some clips that it uses that are from later in the series than what I've watched, at least, but it doesn't really give too much away at all. I think everything they show in the trailer, you can infer is going to happen at some point, just given the kind of show that this is. But the basic premise is that an alien is attempting to escape with some magical stones, 5 multicolored magical stones, and ends up crashing on Earth, and the stones get dropped on Earth in an area which I'm assuming is New Mexico. It has kind of the geography of New Mexico, and also there's the whole Roswell spaceship crash thing that I'm sure they're referencing here. Just in time for a kid who, as far as I can tell, is literally just named Kid, to find them, and he's obsessed with comic books and superheroes. And so he convinces himself that these are stones of power. He glues them to some, what do they call them? What are they called? Nuts? He glues them to some nuts so that he can use them as rings, expecting them to give him superpowers. And the majority of the first episode, or like at least half of the first episode, is just him running around being a pretty entertaining manic kid character as he tries to get these rings to work, only finally managing to get one of them to work and give him the power of flight. And when a teenage character, Joe, the waitress at the local diner, who desperately wants to get out of town and explore the world, ends up coming upon the entire situation and picks up another one of the rings, discovering that it has the power to create portals, and then the two of them team up using their 2 individual rings to stop. I'm assuming this is supposed to be the same alien that dropped the rings. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because he did have a different ship, so it's possible that this is somebody else. I don't know. I'm assuming we'll find out more about the dynamics of all the alien stuff later in the season, so I'm just not going to worry about it. But an alien lands, tries to take the stones back for his great leader or something, I think is what he called him, and the two of them do team up to defeat him and trap him in the floor of an old trailer. So now Kid has it in his head that he's going to find people to wield these rings alongside him and form a superhero team to defend the Earth from alien invaders. And I decided when I saw that not all of the rings had been assigned by the end of the first episode that I'd watch until they were, which took me through episode 2, where his 4-year-old neighbor becomes Enoninja Gigantica, the 40-foot-tall 4-year-old. And already I think she might be my favorite character. I like Joe a lot too, but I think Rosa might be my favorite character. And they have another fight with the alien who gets free here, and in the midst of that, his kid's grandfather, Papa G, also gets one of the rings and gets the power to duplicate himself, and in the end, they give the final ring to a cat for safekeeping. Of all things, a cat. And I know from some of the stuff I've seen about the show what the 5th ring does. I could have watched one more episode because I imagine there's going to be shenanigans related to it, but I do know that the 5th ring gives the power of precognition. So as far as I'm concerned, we've worked our way through the premise of the show, so I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about how that premise was presented in this opening couple of episodes. And straight up, I mentioned that the premise alone sold me on this show, and that's because the show feels so different from anything that I've seen before. The art style is very old school comic book, but still very manic. It has the same kind of manic energy that a lot of McCracken stuff has. And while it hasn't really been laugh out loud funny all that much yet, it's consistently amusing, and these characters are all very realistic and likable so far. I find them all super enjoyable. Even the villain, I think they call him, Stuck Chuck or something, who it's already implied is going to get a redemption arc, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they handle that. Because, already, even though he is clearly the antagonist up to this point, his interactions with the other characters have already been super fun. But at the same time, the premise calls to mind a lot of stuff that I've seen before. The colored stones on, they're not literally on rings in the example I'm going to be giving, but on a person's hand call to mind the Infinity Stones, which are very prominent in pop culture right now thanks to the MCU. Between the fact that each one's a different color and each one bestows a different power, it feels like some inspiration had to have been taken from that concept for this. But then it also calls to mind something like Ben 10, where a kid receives powers from an alien source and is now forced to use those powers to defend himself and his world. Because, unlike in Ben 10, Kid can just take the ring off, and the others can just take their rings off and hand them off to somebody else. But, who are they going to give them to? Stuck Chuck makes it very apparent that all of the people, all of the alien people, anyway, who are looking for the rings are pretty much equally bad. And maybe he's wrong about that. But, I don't see any reason to assume he is at this point, right? And Joe mentions they could hand him off to the police or the military or the government, but I don't trust any of those three things. And I don't think the characters in this should either, because it seems like that kind of story, right? Where any one of those groups would just abuse this power. So while they don't literally have to keep the alien devices on them, like Ben did in Ben 10, it still feels like they're being left with little other choice than to use these powered objects to defend themselves and their world, so it does call that to mind, as does the fact that Kid seems like a fairly similar character to Ben, though I'd argue less competent, which I think makes him a little more interesting. And the fact that there's going to be a whole team of heroes here, some of whom are other kids of different ages, and some of whom are an old man. I'm not counting the cat yet, because maybe the cat will contribute something to the dynamic, but I'm not really expecting much. I hope I'm surprised, but I'm not really expecting much. The fact that they're so varied, though, means we're going to be getting different perspectives on this entire struggle, and that also is super interesting to me. Chuck also mentions that the stones have powers that any bad guy would kill for, which makes me think, because we see them do some impressive stuff, but the most impressive ones so far, from the perspective of an alien despot or something, is the one that makes you grow giant and get proportionately strong and durable. But the rest of these have shockingly unoffensive powers. Not offensive in the I'm offended kind of way, but the offensive in you hit me in the face with your offensive power kind of way, right? So I'm wondering if the rings have more powers than just the surface level powers that we've seen so far. Either when they come together, they unlock additional powers, because we never see Kid activate them all at the same time, and then he hands them all out to different people, right? So they could be saving a surprise combo power, or several surprise combo powers for later. Or if there's some other use for these rings, aside from just the powers that they manifest in a person. So already there's some mystery elements here that are keeping me intrigued, making me think. And you guys know I really like that kind of thing in my entertainment. The music in this is also really solid. It's a little repetitive so far, but still pretty solid, and not the kind of thing you see in cartoons all that often. It's just this is a snappy, witty show with a lot of energy and some very realistic and yet still likable kid characters, and a remarkably intriguing premise. There's really nothing about this one I don't like so far. These first 2 episodes even allowed themselves some actual time to breathe and let us get to know the characters and get used to the status quo of the show before shaking it up again by the end of episode 2. We're given just enough time to fall into a groove, and then the groove is upset. And where shows like, let's talk about She-Ra, for example. Let's compare this to She-Ra, for example. She-Ra is another show on the same streaming network that was released in roughly the same streaming format, and yet She-Ra's first episode was just jam-packed full of stuff. It felt like a thousand things were happening in a minute right up until the episode ended, and it made it kind of hard to get on board with the show. I remember mentioning that I didn't really love the early episodes of She-Ra, and that's part of the reason why. It's also one of the reasons why I haven't talked about the newest Tales of Arcadia show, Wizards, either. It felt like too much was happening pretty much all the time in that show, and I had trouble getting invested. But this show takes time to let us really soak in the world, and I appreciate that a lot. I also wonder if perhaps the dynamic of the human characters on Kid's team is meant to just tell us outright that this is a show intended for all age groups. Because if so, that's a really clever way of doing it. Giving each principal age group that you expect to enjoy the show sort of a viewpoint character to become invested in. Like, it does just kind of jump from teenager to old person, but you get my point, I'm sure. And straight up, I do think that this is a show that at least people of most ages could really get something out of. So if you're a fan of animation at all, I would definitely give this one a shot. And I'm really looking forward to watching more of it. I have a review of the full first season scheduled for next week, so look forward to that. I'm certainly going to be looking forward to that, because it means I have to watch the rest of the first season. As per usual, though, guys, I'd like to know, what do you think of Kid Cosmic if you have seen it? No spoilers, please, but let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, if you could, please like the video and share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. I'm trying to get myself out there, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could help. But anyway, this has been my 2 cents on this topic. This has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.